I'm Peter Hay, and it's my pleasure to chair this session. Edgar Kahn, who founded Time Banks, said that no society would ever have enough financial resources to do all the things we expect in our lives, whether that's bringing up our children well, or whether that's looking after our older parents, or whether that's looking after communities and all the rest of it. And that's why he came up with the concept of time banks. And in those time banks, he was also building something very important to the Health Creation Alliance, which is to create that connection between people and the places that they love through volunteering. We know, however, through research that there's a cast iron link between deprivation and community capacity. So this isn't actually straightforward. And it comes back to Neil's points again about how the economy works and the greatest inequalities. So those are some of our challenges that are facing us. Perhaps Edgar Kahn also missed that it's also not just about money. One of the things that's quite interesting about the process of local government reorganisation that we're beginning to tinker with in this country at the moment is that it's turning up what it looks like in our rural and coastal communities. The United Nations and OECD warn that if your ratio of working age adults to older adults dips below 2 to 1, then you're starting to express 1 to 2, you're starting to feel some strain. We're already at points in this country at 1 to 1.7. We're already below that warning level. So actually, where is the workforce going to come from? And how do we use community capacity in a very different way to tap into skills as a resource, not just the financial resource? So having set the challenge, I'm really delighted that I've got such an exceptional panel here to my left who are going to start by giving us, in the time it takes to boil an egg, a kind of 3-minute introduction to how we're going to use community agency and what that looks like. We're then going to whisk those eggs up a bit. We might give you the chance to grill them a bit, and hopefully you'll all find the chance for a sort of useful ingredient that you can take back to your community. So there's your build-up, Jonathan. And Jonathan, do you want to introduce yourself and a bit about and how you've come to this topic?
Yes, hi, thank you for the introduction. Hi everyone, my name's Jonathan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a foundation called Greater Change Foundation. And what we do is we provide cash transfers to people experiencing homelessness in the UK or to prevent them from experiencing homelessness in the first place. So I'm going to, I guess, respond to your brilliant introduction by almost disagreeing, but saying that I think that actually I don't think we can seriously talk about community agency and investment without talking about money and without actually giving control over a piece of budget and over money to communities. And so that's why we do what we do. We think it's very, very important that as much as we can give some really, we've worked with over 2,000 people and supported them to take big steps out of homelessness now. We know that it works well. 85% of them sustain and move on out of homelessness a year on. But, if all we do is provide good financial planning support, a bit of support work, try to give them the TLC that they need without any of the financial resources, the reality is not a single one of them will be able to take that next big step out of homelessness. So we have to be talking about money, right? We have to be talking about giving people resources. So what we do at Greater Change is we match fund. If any local authority, integrated care board, any commissioner who has an interest or should have an interest in reducing poverty, we're interested in running a program like that, we would match their funding on a one-to-one basis and then provide a sort of design, delivery, and evaluation support for a program like that in their local area after. So we've given about £2.5 million so far and supported about 2,000 people, as I said. So yeah, that's my initial sort of contribution to the topic. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Joseph. I'm the chair of Voice for Tenants group. We came together because we knew there was a need in the country for a national tenant voice. What we didn't want to do is just go with the old ways of having the government, housing associations, and all that kind of thing, making their own rules, letting them make decisions, and actually losing the voice of the actual people they're giving homes to. So that's where I came from. I came in, I've been, in social housing all my life, 25 years, on my own, and then having a family and all that kind of thing. And I was invited to join this group, which was the Voices for Tenants steering group. And then we were commissioned to, get a commission in place for the Voices for Tenants to make it a national initiative, which was called Tenants at the Table. We've had a few different things go on with regards how do we bring tenants together? And then we've commissioned the Health Creation Alliance to actually produce a report to explain the need for a national tenants voice. And that was really, really greatly done by the Health Creation Alliance. And going forward, we've now got our next stage of funding to actually go from where we were with the report to now make it a midwifery group, which will then help co-design the next stage to make it a national project. So that's where we are at the moment. We're quite young. We've only been around for just over a year and a half. But the actual project has been ongoing for over 10 years. So, you know, people say, well, things happen quite quickly, but I think, you know, it's taken its time, and we're looking at least another 2 to 3 years before it will come to fruition. But I see that without community, we can't go forward with this, because just taking it out there and having, you know, somebody in Manchester, somebody in Birmingham, somebody from where I come from in Cornwall, somebody from Scotland, you know, it doesn't matter where we're from. We need to get housing associations and, you know, councils to listen to the people that live in their homes. We need to now turn it around from going, actually, we're renters that live in homes, and get told, to being part of the actual process and going, actually, you need to listen to us. We live in your homes. We know the problems. We deal with them. I mean, look at it. Starting next week on Monday, Awab's law comes into fruition, and then the people need to listen to the issue of damp and mould. Now, to some people think that's a minor thing, but to us that live with it, it's horrible. I mean, we've seen over the news, we've seen lots of things about how bad damp and mould can affect our homes, especially in areas where I live in Cornwall, where it's very deprived. We're very close to the sea, so we deal with the salt. We deal with lots of things that affect our homes. And now we've got a cost of living crisis, which people are deciding between eating and heating. I mean, where does this change? And I feel the Health Creation Alliance is really, if we can get people's health right by giving them a home that's comfortable, that's warm, that keeps them safe, I feel health will improve. And I think that's why we're here today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cordelle Ofori. I'm Director of Public Health for the City of Manchester. And in Manchester, I'm responsible for leading a programme called Making Manchester Fairer, which is all about how we improve health equity, tackle health inequalities in Manchester. So the perspective that I'm going to reflect on is about how and why community agency is important for the services that we provide that improve health and economic inclusion. So if we improve community agency, we're going to get better outcomes. We should get better and more inclusive services. And in order to get those two things, crucially, it will help build trust. And I think the bit about building trust is even more important now, when we see the challenges that are happening in our nation and worldwide. So I love a definition, and often words that we start using all the time, I tend to just go back to the dictionary definition. So this morning I Googled agency, and once I got beyond all the definitions that relate to it being a type of organisation, etc., the words that came up were about control, power, influence, independence, decision-making, ability to act independently. So what does this mean for how we enable communities to set priorities, make decisions, and influence what happens with our services? So if we think about the way in which services come about, commissioners split it up into three broad categories. So the first one is around strategic planning and decision-making. So my question would be, when we're doing the bit about working out what the needs are, and we're planning what the services should look like, and we're working out our priorities, who's in the room? Have we got a community voice and perspective in the room? have we got a diverse community voice and perspective in the room? The second kind of section in commissioning is procurement. So that's the bit about designing the actual service model. Who's it going to be delivered by? Where's it going to be delivered? How is it going to be delivered? And again, the question to ask is, who's in the room? Who's informing where's the best place that would make the services accessible? Who should be delivering it to them? And in what way? Is it going to be culturally competent? Is it going to meet the needs of that specific community? And then the third section is about monitoring and evaluation. So again, ask yourself, who's in the room? What metrics are we using? Are we using the metrics that measure what we value when we're thinking about community voice and agency? Or are we measuring the same things that we always do in terms of health outcomes, which means we miss the things that many of the people in this room would consider as important? So just to bring that to life a bit in terms of practical examples, if we take the strategic decision-making bit, for Making Manchester Fairer, we have a programme board. And the board membership is a combination of the people you would normally find on the board of a large multi-agency programme. So there are people at executive level on the whole of their organisations. But if we had stopped there, that board wouldn't have been inclusive and it wouldn't have had community voice. But we also didn't want to have a tokenistic, let's have a patient rep on the board and, you know, box ticked. So we ran an expressions of interest exercise that was advertised broadly across Manchester and said, right, we're looking for people who have agency, so they're already leaders in their own right and will be comfortable being on a board and speaking truth to power. But they also need to bring some form of lived experience and insight into the conversation so that we've got a different perspective on the board. Running alongside that, we've also set up a community forum. So they are people who are local residents who have, on the whole, never been involved in anything to do with the council or the NHS from a decision-making point of view, but have something to say. And they have got their own forum and they're starting to find their own way of influencing the decisions that we're making. Another practical example then, if we come to the service delivery aspects, so I think sometimes we have to be realistic about, when we're talking about co-production and co-design, how we reach the people that we generally fail to reach and are underserved. So you spoke about the challenge of heating, keeping your house warm, keeping a room over your head, of getting food on the table. If you're that person who's working 2 or 3 jobs and you don't know, you're not sure from week to week, how are you going to keep the lights on, how are you going to keep your home warm, and how are you going to keep the food on your table? Have you really got the time to go to that workshop that's being run in the community centre that's saying, come and help us co-produce our new service? Probably not. So actually, the people on the ground, who they're sometimes called community development workers, we've got field workers who are on Winning Hearts and Minds programme in Manchester, community champions, the people who can come alongside people, channel and advocate for their voice and their insight and bring that into how we deliver those services are really important. One final practical example of that, and I'll stop, is some of you may have heard of Workwell or the Economic Activity Trailblazer, where there's been lots of funding to help people either sustain work if they're at risk of losing a job because of poor health, or get back into work. One of the approaches that we've taken in Manchester is that voluntary sector organisations have been commissioned to deliver that work and health and support with work and skills programme. A couple of those organisations are organisations that work with particular racially minoritized groups, one that works more with South Asian communities and one that works more with Black African and Caribbean communities. And as a result of that, they're delivering an approach that's culturally competent and that the communities they're reaching are more likely to trust and engage with, and therefore they're more likely to become economically included, for want of a better phrase. So those are just a few examples of the way in which we're doing that in Manchester. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So some really strong examples already of some of the values and issues that Marion pointed out about power shifting, about voice, about the importance of listening. I think there's also something about agency, and quite rightly, the challenge of this session is about investing in communities. Cordelle's already illustrated some of the, if you like, capacity that's invested into here in Manchester. So let's have a think about actually what would we do with additional resources, because I think community capacity isn't just getting more for free out of already stressed communities. Where would we invest, if that makes sense? That's the question coming. Panel, so a quick minute to get your head around that. Extra Care Charitable Trust did some superb research with Aston University, where they looked at the extra care housing model for older people. And what they found is that the work they do with nursing and primary care means that primary care costs increase in order to decrease the use of acute care and the rest of it. So there's an example of actually you do require the movement of resources into the community. So panel, well, what would you want to invest in if I gave you that magic wand?
Well, I'm going to sound like I'm going to repeat myself, because obviously I think that we would invest in our program. I think what's really important about the program is we don't duplicate existing frontline support work. So we actually work in Greater Manchester as a part of the Pathfinders Housing First program, and the beauty of the work there is that my team and I don't have to run frontline support work. We can simply plug into existing expertise. And so I guess to your point about not demanding more out of already distressed communities living in deprivation, I think that's a really important point. That actually, if you're a support worker, one of the things that makes, I don't know how many people here have been sort of frontline support workers before, but one of the things that makes a job really difficult, beyond the hours and the terrible pay and and so on, is the fact that you spend most of your time saying no to people, right? You have to twist yourselves into shapes. To try to jump through 20 hoops to get a small grant to do a very simple thing, and it just doesn't make sense, right? And sometimes you wake up feeling like, I just want to say yes to someone today. I just want to be able to say, right, let's do this together. We can knock down some of these barriers. And fundamentally, a lot of these barriers are financial in nature, and that actually they make perfect economic sense for us to undertake. So some of the examples, for example, one of the clients we'd supported in London during COVID was a mother with 3 kids living in a privately rented house. She had lost her job for a period of 6 or 7 months, and as a result had accumulated about £7,900 in rent arrears, and was therefore being threatened with eviction because she had gotten a job again, but she wasn't really earning enough to, meaningfully pay down the arrears. Now, when we think about what that means, if we were to allow that eviction to happen, I mean, not only is it a terrible thing to put that family through and the effects that's going to have on their health, mental health, the educational attainment of her kids, but also it would cost our system an inordinate amount of money, right? Like, I can guarantee you that, and I think everyone here knows it, that we'll spend way more than £7,000 managing the case within a month or 2 months. The cost of temporary accommodation in this country, we're paying £2.6 billion in temporary accommodation last year. So the money exists, we're just spending it very poorly. And part of what we're trying to say is that actually if you were to devolve that decision-making power, really push it all the way out to the frontline workers and the clients, which is what we do. So we say, what are your barriers? What are your ambitions? How do you want to get out of homelessness? Does the support worker believe in a plan? And if the answer to that is yes, then yeah, let's do it together. Let's knock down those barriers. And that we would actually be saving the public purse quite a lot of money anyway. So it's just a perfectly sensible thing to do at every step of the way. So yeah.
Cordelle or Joe?
Yeah, if I can come in on that. To me, I think the model is all wrong for social housing. The government are giving less and less to housing associations. The percentage of GDP they give when building a property, and the cost of properties, and the new structure of social housing, which isn't social housing. They need to change the terminology to affordable housing, which is 80% of market rents. Now, can I be honest? I live in Cornwall, and most rents in Cornwall are up to £1,500 a month minimum. And if they're giving it out 80%, you're looking at about £1,200 a month for somebody living in social housing, which I think is a means to danger. It's a means to putting people in a position where they can't afford to live in these homes because they haven't got the structure or the amount of money they need. Jobs are not well paid. It's a ever decreasing circle that they can't get out of. They're having to apply for housing benefit, and that's coming out of the public purse. So it's really like, how do we change this so that the model goes back to the existing social housing model, which is a lot lower rents? Because I can be honest with you, I'm in a council house. I pay £400 a month for my property, which is a 3-bedroom house. But that's because it's a council house. For the same house in social housing, I'd be looking at £900 a month. Now, I'm sorry, the difference is too far. And they're all on about, the biggest thing I've been questioned recently, is they want to break down the gap between council housing and social housing and try and, build up council housing rents so that they're closer to social housing rents. And I just think, actually, you're going to be bringing more people into more poverty. Where do we make a change in society and go, people need a home? If they haven't got a home, if they're not safe, if they can't pay their bills, it puts pressure on the NHS. It puts the pressure on local resources. It puts pressure on charities. Shelter are really struggling to get a lot of help to a lot of people. We're all being told to go to citizen advice, but what can they do? They're overworked. There's too many people going to them to get help. Where do we make this change? And I think we need to make it at the beginning with the tenant voice. Listen to the people rather than listening to government, and listen to housing associations who've had their way for too long, and they seem to think they know how to do it, but actually a lot of the time they don't. Because actually by talking to them, they actually go, we didn't think of that. Actually, that was good to listen to you. I agree with what you said there. And then they go, we need to make a change. And we're actually seeing change starting to happen. But, this is the big but, you've got these companies that are working on behalf of the government, and if you apply for funding from them, they've told us, and this is the thing that will get you, and it makes me laugh, is we're not allowed to petition government. How does that work? And this is the problem. I'm like, so how do we change the whole dynamic of, if somebody gives you some money, is there going to be things that are going to stop us actually using the money to the best effect without all of these conditions? And as soon as that changes, I think that's when we will see a better movement in society.
What would I invest in? Was that the question? Right. A very long list, but I think ultimately it would be all of the things that we need to do that lift people out of poverty. So I was reflecting on Professor Sir Michael Marmot in one of his books. He talks about 3 types of power. So he talks about political power, which is your ability to influence your community, your city, your nation. So we exercise most of that through voting in a democracy, but there are other ways. He talks about psychosocial power, so a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of agency, influence over your own thoughts, minds, behaviours, decision-making. And material power, which is essentially about money. And I would argue about coming back to the examples of somebody with 3 children, difficulty keeping the lights on, the heating on, etc. if you've not got enough money, how can you have psychosocial and political power? You've just not got the headspace. You've not got the time. You're just juggling and struggling to survive. So the things that we do that lift people out of poverty are just underpin everything that we do, both to improve health and health inequalities, but also the things that we need to do to enable communities and people to have more agency. So for me, that kind of underpins everything. And I guess the other thing that I would say is aligned to that is more money and more investment would be great, but it's also how we spend it. And at the moment, lots of community groups, both small grassroots community organisations and larger voluntary community faith-based social enterprises are struggling, and yet they're the organisations that have the best reach into those communities. So providing those organisations with sustainable long-term core funding is really important as well.
Brilliant. Grand. So a bit of warning now that we're going to go and turn to you, and Steve will magically appear from somewhere. You may have seen me scanning the room desperately. There we go, with a microphone. So if you've got a question, stick your hand up, and Steve will come to you. One of the things I think is really interesting and was common through all of those presentations, the discussions from each speaker, was how the community side struggles for resources. And Jonathan will be delighted, Jamie will be delighted. In the IPPR work, there's a lot of conversations about how we need to talk about financialisation in IPPR's language, how money is used. Jonathan, you said really clearly, money exists, it's just how we use it. With the growth in mental health, people might be shocked to realise that 1 in 6 of every pound we spend in mental health goes to 1 of 3 private hospital groups. Jonathan illustrated how we're supporting housing need, not homes. The issues about community support were kind of really clear. So one of the things the Alliance is trying to do is also have a conversation about how we change those use of resources and how we talk about the use of money and existing money. Frankly, if you're providing public services in the UK, it would be fundamental to my set of beliefs that you pay taxes in the UK and are registered in the UK. That does not apply to people delivering services to vulnerable children in care, to those in mental health, to those drawing in some of our services for older people. And the real obscenity is when you get Panorama. So a little bit of soapbox. Panorama saying, here we are in Inverness charging £2,100 a week to people. Oh, and by the way, we can't get workforce because we pay at minimum wage. Well, if you're charging that, you can actually be paying 18 quid an hour, just saying, hashtag. So we need to talk about the money. We need to talk about how we change that money. And we need to support brave councils, for example, those that are brave, that are saying, we're not placing outside of our area, and change the dynamics in the market. It's not a lazy conversation about profit. Where's Steve gone with the microphone? Here we go. Let's get some questions from the floor. We'll get a round of them.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Kat. I do a lot of work across the country, particularly in the social care space. I'm really interested in that side of it and where social care maybe more prominently sits within this. But I suppose a question that's going through my mind, having listened to people this morning, is we're talking about why investment in community agency is important and how we do it. But I think Cordelle's touched on it a little bit, and others on the panel just now, is understanding what creates agency for people is a fundamental part of this. And yes, the resources and the finance and shifting how we use those things is really, really important. But none of that is going to have the impact unless we really understand on that interpersonal level. And I would say even an intrapersonal level, the importance of listening and trust and creating connection on a human-to-human level and building the relationships with people in those communities and those organisations in the first place. And so if we're serious about investing in community agency, how are we investing in being able to build those relationships and connections and really understand what creates agency and what agency means to those people in those communities in the first place?
Brilliant, thank you, Kat. And then there was a question sort of somewhere here in the middle.
And there was someone on the far side as well, Peter.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Gillian Oliver. I'm here with a team from Blackpool. We're inspired by the Poverty Truth Network and this Nothing About Us Without Us, which is coming very strongly from the panel. I feel like my question is, can I reach out to you? If you're an alliance, can you give us an ally? Because in Blackpool, we found we have an issue. It looks like this. In a town where public health stats are dire, where life expectancy for men has just fallen, we have no volunteer transport up and down to the hospital. People that we speak to at the hospital know that it exists in Lancaster and Preston and Cumbria and Northumberland, but it doesn't exist in the most deprived town in England. And yet we know that missed appointments cost the NHS. And if you just take out from the money that's available from missed appointments, say for disabled people that miss appointments, it's £850,000 a year. And yet when we speak to the council about could we get a wheelchair accessible bus up and down to the hospital, he says he will not live long enough to see that happen. The reason being that it requires at least 2 departments to work together around a problem. So if you're an alliance, please could you find us an ally? Because we've got the cash, it's in there, we just need to get it out.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's brilliant, Gillian.
Like someone offering help. Just
Evidencing that the research that actually a huge link between community capacity and deprivation is real. There you go. It's well taught by some academic somewhere. And we'll take a final question and then do a sum up.
Oh, hi, I'm Claire. So lovely to see Kat. Oh my God, I usually see you on the screen. Hello. I'm coming from a sort of place perspective, and I just wondered if anyone could reflect on the importance of free, neutral community spaces, because I see a huge amount of threat to these sort of places that are like basically non-profit making, and how can we mobilise and maximise the way that we can gather people together in a way to create those social connections and support.
Brilliant. So panel, do you want to pick something out of that and just comment? Cordelle, do you want to start this time? Start it. So
I think I'll start with Kat and this ladies, because I think they are connected. So the first thing I would say is I absolutely agree. Kat knows me, so she knows that I'll agree that relationships are fundamental to everything, and enabling us to build relationships with the people for whom we are trying to enable agency is really important. I think from a public sector perspective, some of that is about how we fund community organisations and the people on the ground to do that work. Some of that is about workforce development and training that enables us as people who are commissioning and providing services to actually do that in a different way, to listen, to respond, to build trust. So when you've listened, don't just go away and never feedback on what you heard. Let them know what happened. Even if what happened wasn't a positive outcome, people tend to respond well if you go back and say, we heard what you said, we were able to do X, Y, and Z, we weren't able to do A, B, and C for this reason, but let's work on maybe how we may be able to make A, B, C, and happen eventually. So that listening and building trust in relationships bit, I think, is really important, and there are a number of different ways that we can do that. And then I think linking that to your question, those spaces are really important, and one of the things that we've heard loud and clear is how people value the spaces in their local area, whether it be leisure centres, community centres, church halls, school buildings. There are lots of buildings and spaces that are in communities that may have been built for a certain purpose, but at different times of day can be used in a different way, where people can connect, come together, build relationships, as well as providing services in different ways as well. And I think we do need to think more through that kind of place-based approach about how we make the most of all those assets in terms of buildings and spaces that we have in our communities.
I think the thing is for me is it's just about local government and, you know, and central government. It's always been an issue that the two don't want to work together. The government is about protecting its assets, keeping hold of the money, and then everybody has to apply for it. They come out with these big figures, you know, in the government and go, we're giving away 1 billion to this year and 2 billion to that. But when you actually break it down, how that's split across the country, the amount of times I know that Cornwall misses out, we don't get access to that funding. And then the local communities are struggling because they've got no funding to actually get from locally. So the local councils haven't got the money to give to charities, to community areas, and then they're struggling to have to get money other ways by going out and spending time in, you know, in the front of supermarkets. I mean, Trussell Trust is working really hard to help people with food, with, you know, with things that we need to live. But look at where food banks are now. They're at the floor. And it's because the top are not listening to the bottom. And this is the whole point, is we need to change the whole thing. We need to turn it on its head and go, actually, listen to the Trussell Trust. Listen to Shelter. Listen to communities that are saying we are struggling, rather than going, actually, let's protect the most, you know, the richest in society, the 1% in society, so that we can make sure that they're okay, but everybody else in the country can, you know, swing their hook, basically, and see where it lands. And I think that's really sad that we live in a society which claim it cares. You know, 5th highest, you know, GDP in the world, you know, and we're still struggling. And sometimes it's like struggling in a third world country where we live, and it should never be like that. So how do we make that change? How do we get this out to the people that can make the difference? Rather than people like myself, all I am is a person that lives in a home. I haven't got no backing. I've got no supporters. I haven't got a company behind me. I live on benefits, but I'm here today. And my view is, if I can get my voice out there, if I can make a difference, surely that's a good thing. And we've got to stop living this whole thing of keep living in poverty because it's okay. It's not okay. It nearly is not. And that's why when we commissioned this work with the Health Creation Alliance, it was about, we need to turn everything around and make people listen.
Yeah, I think actually, I don't know if I really have an answer or a solution, but maybe just sort of sharing the sorrow of it, because I think sort of the commonality, I think, through all 3 points, all 3 questions, is that it's really difficult to do something new. I get this all the time, and we talk to a lot of different policy advisors, think tanks, etc. You know, there's this view that as a country, we can't afford both treatment and prevention at the same time. And because we're locked into the treatment side and it's too painful to cut anything there, that we therefore cannot put any money into prevention at all. So what you were saying before about the amount of money that, you know, every single pound that's the NHS has seen increase in its budget, so pretty much every single pound has gone to hospitals, right? And like very, very few of that has gone into prevention. And similarly in the homelessness space, prevention as a proportion of homelessness spend has gone down over time. So even though we will all sit in a room like this and say, yeah, prevention's better than cure, like actually nothing's really happening in terms of budget allocations to reflect that knowledge. So obviously I find that incredibly frustrating, you know, the question about the community bus to get people to, you know, every missed appointment, say, costs the trust £50 to £100 is much easier to bleed the £50 and £100 each time than it is to spend a couple of grand up front to buy the bus and get a driver, right? But that's not a economic or fiscal argument. It's an argument about how difficult it is to get stuff done. And I do think councils get a pretty hard shtick. Like they sort of have very, very tightly restricted budgets, as you were saying, Joe. They have to apply for budgets from central government, and the grants are then very, very restrictive in themselves. So it's very hard for councils to take creative action, even if they wanted to. So I think it's important to recognize that as well. But yeah, I think you're totally right, Joe. I think it comes back down to who actually has real power over a budget, who actually has real decision-making power, and how do we get it to people who will actually, take the sensible action. So the example I gave earlier, we paid off that family's rent arrears, right? And we think it's a fantastic deal that we should take every single time as a society. Because, as I said, even on temporary accommodation costs alone, we break even within 3 months. So it's not a fiscal argument, really, because within a fiscal event, a life cycle of a parliament, that will way more than break even. But even within a single fiscal year, it would way more than break even. So we're trying to make that argument, but it is tough. And I think we have to acknowledge that it comes back down to the fact that it's very frictionful and it's difficult to make decisions that are new and different to the status quo.
Brilliant. Thank you. Brilliant. And so thank you ever so much for a super panel. I think you'll agree have given a lot of insight into how we do it, from the big economic questions, from recognising some of the really significant barriers, but also through to the issues about how we shift power, build relationships and trusts, and the real importance of that in a new kind of social contract about community agency. And with that, it's time for us to hand on, so that hopefully that's a starter of how you go about it. So thank you very much to the very good panel. Thank you, panel.
Brilliant session, wasn't it? Wasn't that fantastic? Brilliant. Great stuff. Really enjoyed it. Brilliant. I loved the point about agency. Wasn't that really powerful, I think? And it made me think, you hear things, it triggers things in your head. What is it, 50 of the richest families in the UK own the same amount of wealth as half the population of UK? They have agency. They have voice. They have control. They have power. So the structural inequalities that sit beneath the question of agency are really important. And for me as an economist, that's important to flag up.